In this video, we're going to be covering animations. I've created a project in Visual Studio Code, and in the browser you can see different types of animations that we're going to cover, each one by one, talk about it. We're going to relate it to transitions, which I did another video on, but without further ado, let's go right into it. So in Visual Studio Code, I've created a index.html file with 5 different types of boxes with 5 different types of animations. And I've created, just a little bit of a layout, CSS, just so for the styles, for the overall look and everything. And then I've just concentrated solely in styles.css, only the styles that relate to animations, which we're going to talk about. So with animations, we could jump right in. So with every animation, it's in a way an expansion of a transition. So a transition is that intermediate period, from based on a trigger followed by a transition of an effect or an action. An action's taking place in the browser, and this transition is determining the in-between that's going to be taking place while this this animation's occurring. Animations is an expansion upon that, and it's a little bit more advanced. There's 2 parts to it versus more of one part with the transition. It's more just mostly the transition selector or transition declaration, and animations, it's the declaration but also keyframes. So you'll see in the file here at keyframes and then followed by a name of an animation and then curly braces. It looks kind of similar to a media query if you're familiar with that. It starts with the @ symbol, and then down below we have the animation taking place, or we're targeting the class of the box, and then we're specifying animation and then specifying some basically how we want this animation to run in the browser. So we specify the animation, we create it with a keyframe, and then we specify it a bit more with how is it going to run in the browser based on the animation declaration. You'll see that animation, you could swap that out for transition and it could look similar in a way, and actually it is in a lot of ways. So I've written it out here, but essentially animations and transitions, you have a couple similarities. So animations have a name, a duration, timing function, delay. These first 4 are exactly the same to a degree as transitions: property name instead of animation name, duration, timing function, and delay. So those carry over to animations. Animations has a few extras out of the box to make it a bit more advanced and customizable. And you'll see that here we've got iteration count, direction, fill mode, and play state, which we're gonna we're gonna go over in these examples. So what I've done in the 5 examples, I've set up the keyframes, I've set up the animation, and then I've essentially listed out all possible options for the animation declaration. You could list those out individually, but animation's kind of like that catch-all. You can list them all in the same line. So I've gone ahead and done that just for the tutorial. You don't need to do this for your own animations, but it is helpful, I think, when you're first starting out, to make sure you know all the options available and just get in regular practice of writing those out so you're used to knowing about the options. So we're going to cover that today. Perfect. Okay, so the first one here, animations. You have the keyframe. That's the first part is you want to create an animation. Think about I want to start with a keyframe. That's the first step you want to do is build out this animation, and you're building it out from how you want this animation to take place from start to finish. And then the animation declaration is where you get into more of the nuance of more about what's going to take place in the browser. So we start with the @ keyframes, and then we give it a name, the animation a name. It could be anything you want. In this case, we've been descriptive and said we want to rotate. That's going to be that first animation we see here. We want it to rotate. So that's the first step. @ keyframes followed by the name of whatever animation you want to do, and then curly braces. So curly braces, it's going to be same as like a CSS selector in a way. You do those curly braces to wrap around more of the these properties that we're going to get into. So with rotate, curly braces, and then within the curly braces, kind of the same as like a media query when you're wrapping more CSS rule sets. You're specifying the frames from the start of the frame, the start of the animation, to the end of the animation. You're specifying these frames, and you can do it in 2 ways. You can either do it with text, some more more human speak, you can say, from to to, or you could do it percentage-wise, which is exactly the same thing. So from is 0% at the start of the animation, and to is 100% at the end of the animation. And you'll see that here in the next keyframe, for the next animation that we'll talk about, that uses 0% to 100%. But in this case, for the first example, we're just talking, from to to, make it really simple. So this is creating keyframes. You're creating the animation for the first part, and you're dictating, hey, at the start for from, I want to have the rotation at 0 degrees. So just a normal element, nothing's changed. You're just saying transform, rotate 0 degrees at the start, and then the to is the end. What's going to happen at the end? Well, I want it to turn 360 degrees. I want to turn one loop around. I want that element to turn. So from and to dictates, what's going to happen at the start, what's going to happen in the end, and then the computer is going to make this run from 0 degrees to 360. So from 0% to 100%, that animation is going to take place. You can get even more nuance, which we're going to go into later, where you could specify what happens in the middle, 50%, or what happens at 75%. You can get more nuance like that, but here we're just doing 0 to 100, which is the most basic animation. And so that's step 1, specifying the animation. Now step 2 is right here, and it's strictly just this. So the only thing you need to create the animation with keyframes, and then you need to use the animation declaration or the animation property here to be able to get this running in the browser. So you can't just have keyframes, you need both. In this animation declaration, we are specifying some values, and we've already kind of talked about them. They're very similar to transitions. You don't need all these, but I'm using all of them for the tutorial. So we're specifying, hey, what is the name of the animation? In a transition, you're specifying, the property that you want to use here. So if it was like background color, etc., if you're changing something, its state is changing. And the interesting thing about animations is this doesn't require a trigger like a transition. A transition is going to require, when the user hovers over an element, then you can do the action, and the transition will dictate what happens to get to the end of the action. Animations, that's not the case. You can just, have that rolling without any input from the user. And so we're saying, hey, we want to use rotate. We want it to take duration-wise, same again as transition. That's exactly the same, 2 seconds, or you could do 2,000 milliseconds. You want it to, that whole 0 to 360, we want it to last 2 seconds. We want it linear, so this is going to be the timing function in terms of the speed. It's going to be constant throughout. It's going to be no delay, so 0 milliseconds or 0 seconds, whichever is your preference. Let's actually we can say 2,000 milliseconds to keep it consistent. So 2,000 milliseconds, 0 milliseconds. You've got infinite, so we want this to loop. So this is where you specify the iteration. So this is going to be this is going to be how many times you want this to run. So we're saying duration is run it once for 2 seconds, and then this is where you specify this property is going to be where you specify how many times you run it, and that's going to be that iteration count is the correct full term for it. So iteration count is here, so how many times you want this to run. Normal is the default. The normal is just going to be you've got normal, none, and running, and we're going to cover those. So these are going to be the direction, the fill mode, and the play state. These are not required to specify if you're just doing an animation. The defaults are normal, none, and running, but I want to go through these, and we'll go through them so you get an idea. But direction, it's just going to be the standard way. It's going to go for rotation, it's going to go turning to the right, but you've also got reverse, which is turning to the left. You've got alternate and alternate reverse, and so we're going to cover all of those as well. And then we've got fill mode, we've got play state. Fill mode is it's going to be, we're going to look at this, but it's going to dictate do we want, so the most easiest one to understand is forwards. So none is the default, where the animation runs, things happen in the animation, but nothing is applied to the element as a permanent change. Forwards is applying all of the changes to the end of the animation. So if you, let's say, change the color is going to stay whatever color you change it to during the animation. So, and then you've got backwards and both, which are other variations which we can cover too. And then the final one is play state. Play state is, by default going to be running, but you also can pause it. And you see here on hover, I've gone ahead and say, hey, animation-play state paused. And so when we hover over it, we're going to pause the animation. So let's first take a look at this in the browser. So you'll see it rotating. We've got the animation running from 0 degrees to 360 degrees, from 0% to 100%. It's doing one loop around. And if we hover over it, it pauses. At any point, we can just pause it. And it's going for infinite iterations. We can instead change this to 2 instead of infinite. And so if we watch this, it goes once, it goes twice, and then it pauses, right? So that's one. And then we've got, we've got the other ones. So we've got normal, but we also can do reverse. And so it's going backwards twice. To the left, I said. And then it pauses, like so. Then we've got alternate. And, oh, whoops. We've got alternate. And this is going to go, it's going to start going to the right, and then it's going to go back to the left. So since it's only twice, it's only doing that one time, going to the right, and then it's coming backwards, and then that's over. And then you also could do alternate reverse, which is, the reverse of that. So it's going to the left, then it's going to go to the right, and then it's going to stop. So those are variations, but by default, it's just going to be that normal. That's the default one. Just going the normal way you would expect. And that you don't have to specify normal, I'm just specifying here so you can see it. The other thing we have is we have none here, and that's going to be the fill mode. And so we can talk about that. And that's actually going to be helpful with colors. And so let's go ahead and dictate that. So let's actually go to the next example. Let's do this example. So background color, just want to make sure it works. So let's say background color red, then we've got background color green. So we're saying, hey, at the start, make it red, and then at the end, make it green, right? And so if we just keep it at normal or none, if we keep it at none, it's going to turn red and then end at green. So turn red, end at green, and then it's going to go back to orange, which was the original color. If you do forwards, so none of the effects happening in the animation are sticking to the original element. But if we say forwards, then this is going to keep to the final color, which is that. Let's go to the right element. Let's change it. So none. Let's say forwards, and then we'll keep this none. So if we see it, now it's the final state is green. And so we see that here. Background color green. And then if we want to do backwards, so that's the other one, backwards, we're going to see, so backwards is going to start at the immediate color. So it starts at red, goes to green, and goes back to orange. So with none, it starts orange, and then you'll see it turn to red and then go to green. But when we start this animation, you'll see that it's automatically the first color, and that's that red, green, and then orange. So that's backwards. And then the final one is both, and both is just it's going to start red and it's going to end and stay green. And so you'll see that here. So if we see red, so if we refresh, it's always red. You never see orange. So see, it's still red the whole time, even if we refresh. And then it's going to stay green if we do both. So both is a combo of backwards and forwards. If you're interested in using that, feel free to check it out more. But the most standard one is none, or by default it's none. So you'll see like so. So really, that's useful if you're dealing with colors or changes in maybe the size or something, and you want it to maintain the effect. I think forwards can be a useful one, and the others potentially as well. But just wanted to show that. And then we're saying running. You don't need to say running. It's automatically running by default. But on hover, we're pausing it. So you're seeing here, instead of running, you could put paused like so. So we can just switch that back to infinite. And so we just went through all of those for the first one. Let's go to the others just really quickly to show you the other examples. But we've covered essentially the two things you need to know. You've got the next one is bounce. So again, at keyframes we're creating the animation. We're naming this animation. You can come up with any name you want. At keyframes, specify the name, bounce. We're being descriptive here. We want this animation to bounce, followed by curly braces. Think same kind of structure in a way to a media query almost. At keyframes, bounce, curly braces. Then you're specifying the frames itself. In this case, we're saying we want this element at the start and at the end to be in the same location. And in the middle, we want it to move up 50 pixels. And we're putting negative pixels because pixels are written from top to bottom, and so it's essentially, even though it's negative, it's different from math. But we're actually when we say negative 50 pixels, we're moving up instead of down, that you might expect from a math class. So translate why we're saying during the middle we want it to bounce 50 pixels. So this is the animation bouncing, and then if you go to the animation, the second part, which is that animation declaration, we're saying, hey, we want it to bounce. We're calling the name of the animation we just made. We're saying let's make it last 1.5 seconds. You can do milliseconds as well. We're saying ease in, out. So like ease in, so start slow, end slow, and then in the middle it's gonna go normal. And then you've got the delay, no delay. A delay is just, if you want it to wait a second before you start, you can do 1 second, 5 seconds. You could dictate that if you want. You don't need to specify this, but I'm putting it here. You've got infinite, so run this forever. Normal, none, and running. We've already covered a lot of that. And you'll see in the browser that it's bouncing. And you can control this more to make it more realistic. You can, turn it into a ball. You could turn it into, you can make this animation, but this is more just the concept to understand animations. And so that's what that bouncing is taking place. Is again, the location has not changed. It's staying at the start and at the end in the same location, but in the middle, it's moving up 50 pixels and coming back. And so that's why we dictated that 50%. So you can get more nuance in the keyframes and specify that. The order also doesn't matter as well. So if we switch this, it should be the same. And you'll see it like so. It's still bouncing. So you're essentially specifying the frames. I think it makes more sense to specify the frames like this, but you can also, make the frames however you'd like. And so that is example 2. Now example 3, we have fade in and out. And so this is changing the opacity. So it's going to, by the end, it's going to start at 0 opacity, it's going to show, and then it's going to go away at 0%. Fade in, out. You'll see again, we're doing the same thing, ease in, out. We're specifying the name. You're seeing that. And then on hover, we're of course pausing it. So invisible, shown, invisible. And then we could, if we said forwards, and we said only do 2 iterations, you'll see that it stays invisible. So again, you can control this animation however you'd like if you want. So we can, you'll see it show for twice, and then it's going to hide. So just wanted to mention that. So then you got infinite. Let's just keep it back to none. Okay, perfect. Now the last two I'll quickly go over. We've got scale pulse. So it's going to be pulsing. It's going to, it's going to stay its original size at the start and end, but in the middle it's going to scale 1.5, and you'll see that pulsing. So it's going to grow in size and shrink, grow and shrink. So that's that animation, scale pulse. And again, we're using, always think of it's two steps. You want to put the animation declaration on the original element, and in this case we've put for that original element a class of dot scale dash box, and we've put the animation property or declaration there, and we are also using, we've created this animation, and that's the scale pulse. And then we've specified some more specifics about how we want that to show in the browser. Now the last one we have is slide left and right. Again, pretty similar. So from 0 to start, we want to translate X, and then 50% we want to make it slide. So during the animation we want it to slide, but we want it to go back to where it was at the beginning. And you'll see that. So it's sliding across the X axis, and it's coming back like so. And we've made this run forever, so it's infinite. But that's that's that animation. So this is just an overview, just to get you familiar with animations, see how similar it is to transitions. Animations, again, it doesn't require a trigger. It can happen without user input. Transitions are more involved with user input. So when a user hovers over an element, of course we have on hover we're pausing here. So I guess you can say in some way there's that input, but it's not required like a transition. It's more like an event or action needs to happen. Then that action takes place, and we can decide the transition or what takes place while that action is running. And so that's what the transition is. You'll see that, again, transition has 4 similar properties to animations: the name, the duration, timing function, and delay. And animation is just a little bit more of a step extra, and we're actually building out the animation versus maybe just doing like transform, translate, which is more of the simpler animation that we could still use in an animation, but you also can just have that alone and just do a transition of dictating how fast is this rotation going to take place in the browser. But in animations we can expand upon that a bit more and make it more advanced. So that is just a quick overview. In future videos I'm looking to show more realistic real life examples of putting this in a project, a website, etc. versus these are more obvious and aggressive animations. I would say you might not necessarily want to do this on an every day-to-day project. So planning on doing more videos that are more realistic, but this is just to get you an idea of the power of animations in CSS.